Hello, my name is Josie Patrick, and this is my presentation on perception and culture. What is perception? Social cognition starts with the social perception, which can be defined as our impressions of people that are formed based upon different characteristics they possess. It might be physical, age, gender, or nonverbal. All these come together to form our social perception. Cognition is how we use these cues to process and apply that information to social situations. We use this information to help us navigate social interactions with the world around us, to form bonds, relationships, and friendships with other people. Now, there's not just face-to-face cognition, but there's also web-based cognition. Web-based, just like in person, we use to gather clues to help us form an impression based on their information online. Sabates tells us that impressions formed in response to observations made in the real world and impressions based on information from a web page have a lot of consistency. Even though there are a lot of qualitative differences between the real world and online, the perception strategies are the same when making first impressions. It's important because our social cognition and perception is directly tied to our quality of life. We know from research that people use their social cognition to judge others' moral characters. It serves as a survival technique. When our perception is processing, we are able to break down these social situations to make rational and appropriate decisions. It directly affects our responses and behaviors, which in turn affects our social perception to those around us. What is culture? Culture is the system of shared values, traits, morals, and customs that molds the way people think, behave, and communicate. It has multiple dimensions, and context affects a conversation deeply. It can define how you perceive the use of your time, and culture usually plays a pretty big role in your communication style. Depending on where you live in the world, there are two major types of context within culture: high context and low context. High context cultures are often intuitive and contemplative, relying on unwritten social rules, communication cues, and is primarily done with posture, voice inflections, gestures, and facial expressions. Some examples include Asia, Arabian, and South American countries. Low context cultures tend to be logical and analytical. They are action-oriented and messages are made clear. These cultures are heavily individualistic, giving people an attitude of independence and freedom from control. Swiss, German, and North American are a few examples of low-context cultures. How culture and perception relate. Social cognition creates the ability to understand and perceive how cultural norms affect a specific society. We evaluate moral character, nonverbal cues, and behavior in order to understand a person or a people. For example, high context versus low context. If two people meet, they will have different social cognitions. Being polite within each culture. Julian S. Borelli defines politeness as a concept which is culturally related, a group of norms and social codes that everyone obeys so that communication goes well in the society. Cultural glasses we are wearing will decide how we interact with culture that is not ours. Julian states that we can benefit from our cultural perspective, being not about what you see, but what you perceive. This leads to our last point. Cultural perspective helps to dictate our responses and behaviors. Again, Julian points out 3 ways to deal with perception and culture, especially if it is unfamiliar to you. Confront, complain, or conform. You can be stubborn and confront the culture with the I'm right attitude. You can choose to complain and segregate yourself from social interactions, or you can conform and profit from diversity. I chose to examine Japanese versus American culture. The most recent census asked people to define themselves by only nationality and not ethnicity, so true demographics of the country are unclear. Early Japanese culture was heavily influenced by China. During the Edo era, Japan exercised a strict isolationist policy. This cultivated a distinctively Japanese culture. After the fall of that era in 1868, Japan revised this practice, adopting cultural practices from all over the world and mixing them with what was established during the Edo era. Over the years, Western culture has influenced all aspects of the Japanese culture. There are two main religions in Japan, Shinto and Buddhism. Shinto is a Japanese religion, while Buddhism was imported in the 6th century from China. A recent poll found that 39% of Japanese people identify as Buddhist, 3.9% as Shinto, and 2.3% as Christian. Japanese people grow up picking up the intricacies of this unique culture as they go through life, respecting the invisible and varied societal rules. There are many aspects of this seemingly complicated culture, including bowing, taking off your shoes when entering a home, and using san as a sign of respect when referring to somebody. Now, how does American culture compare? The melting pot, defined by ethnicity rather than nationality. Different cultures have contributed their own distinct flavors to American culture. Cultural diversity lends to cultural influences being imported and exported. Because the United States was founded most notably by the English who colonized it, we have a major influence from there, but because there are so many different people here from the melting pot, America now exports just as much influence as it imports. Christian-dominated religious affiliations. Nearly every known religion is practiced in the United States. It was founded on the basis of religious freedom, but about 71% of Americans identify themselves as Christians, 23% no religion, and 6% non-Christian religious. Last point, each culture or ethnicity dictates accepted manners and customs in the United States. Because of the melting pot aspect, the amount of diversity and the basis of the country being founded on religious freedom, the traditions and customs of the United States are not as unified as Japan. Though the majority of the country acknowledges and partakes in Independence Day, Labor Day, Memorial Day, and Thanksgiving, all of the religious celebrations are not wholly accepted. Am I surprised? I did not expect so many similarities between Japanese and American culture. They aren't as different as I thought they would be. The social cognition in Japan seems to be more widely practiced, and from a young age it's ingrained in them, so I feel like they have a higher functioning social perception that leads to more finely tuned social cognition. The difference in religious affiliations did not surprise me. And nationality versus ethnicity was the biggest surprise for me. I am in awe that the census would want to know which country they hold nationality in. It is very, very interesting culture. I look forward to learning more about their social context. And for the last slide, we have there is neither Jew nor Gentile, neither slave nor free, nor is there male and female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. I think that's it.